for Ukraine. We are going there to listen and to tell them what we think of all this. So that is the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba speaking a few moments ago. Well, it is now day 4 of Russia's invasion, and the former senior soldier and co-chair of Universal Defense and Security Solutions, General Sir Richard Barons, is here with me now. General Sir Richard, thank you so much for talking us through this every day. Let's talk about Kyiv. A lot going on there today. What exactly do we know?
Yes, Kimberly. So Kyiv was the main story of this morning because we saw a change in the last 24 hours. We saw what we believe is the Russian 4th Tank Army initially intend to bypass rather than go into the city of Kyiv, and then there was a change. And what we then saw were light forces trying to fight their way into the city and finding that they met very stiff Ukrainian opposition. So we now believe that Ukraine remains in control of Kyiv, and that Russian attack has failed, and that will have added to the general sense of frustration Mr. Putin is clearly feeling.
Okay, that's Kharkiv, the second largest city. What about Kyiv, obviously the capital?
Yes, Kyiv remains the military and the political heart of this, and we see on the next map what's beginning to unfold. And we saw yesterday Russian forces closing in on Kyiv from a couple of directions. And what we expected to see was Russian heavy forces, so that's tanks, artillery, infantry and armoured vehicles, beginning to fight their way into the city. Now, that hasn't happened. And why is that? Well, the first thing is the Russian advance over the last 4 days has not gone that well. It's been slower than they expected. They're clearly an inexperienced force, so they're learning as they go. The logistics haven't worked well. They don't appear to have full control of the air, so the support they would get from their air force has been reduced, I think. And they've probably had to revise their plans as they go. But above all of that, they've encountered really stiff opposition, not just from the Ukrainian military, but now from a mobilized Ukrainian civil society, and that we're giving them significant pause for thought. But the issue we're now facing is, do the Russian forces intend to lay siege to Kiev, or are they going to apply all the firepower that they have to fight their way into the city? And if they do that, in the face of the opposition that we know is there, it will result in the destruction of a lot of the city and a lot of civilian casualties.
One of the lines coming out of the last hour is about these the nuclear alert level that Putin has raised. Just talk us through what you think about that and what that brings to the table now.
So we should think about Russians' really heavy weapons, and we should think of them first in the context of what's in Ukraine. And on these photographs here, first up, this is a 203mm caliber artillery gun. It's the biggest artillery gun in the world. It fires a shell weighing 110 kilograms, about 37 kilometers, but it can fire a nuclear weapon with a yield of between 500 and 1,000 kilotons. So that's, I beg your pardon, that's the equivalent of up to 1,000 kilotons of high explosive to a range of about 18 kilometers. So we know this is likely to be in Ukraine, but we haven't seen any sign of its nuclear capability. But it's not just nuclear we should worry about in Ukraine. On this next photograph, this is a thing called a TOS-1. It fires 30 rockets at once in about 15 seconds.
30 rockets at once?
30 rockets in about 15 seconds. Okay. To a range of only about 6 kilometers.
So you have to get them quite close too?
You do. But with these rockets, you get a thermobaric weapon. So this produces essentially an extraordinary wall of flame, sufficient to devastate an entire city block. So it's not nuclear, but it is devastating. It's essentially a conventional weapon of mass destruction. This has been seen in Ukraine, but not fired yet, we believe. And on this next image, this is the Iskander missile. It's in and around Ukraine, but it's also in Kaliningrad, near the Baltic states. This can be nuclear. It has a range of about 500 kilometers. So if we were to ever consider the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the capability exists. It's not really, I think, what President Putin is talking about. So he's begun to raise the nuclear stakes in a way that is way beyond Ukraine. And on this next picture, this is the sort of weapon that we're looking at. So this is an intercontinental range ballistic missile. It reaches from Russia to the US. The warhead that it carries can be maybe 300 kilotons, so 300,000 tons of high explosive, up to 800,000 tons of high explosive. And the Russian nuclear inventory is around 6,000 warheads. So on this map, if President
Let's bring up the map.
If President Putin is talking about these weapons, he's not talking about Ukraine. He's talking about how he is threatening to use nuclear weapons in a way that affects the whole world. And to put that in perspective, a 300 kiloton warhead devastates Washington or London. And if there are many thousands of these warheads, and both blocs have these, both the West and Russia, then in the context of a day where we're talking about Ukraine, suddenly we're talking about the end of civilization. And this is either a sign of madness or desperation, but it's clearly out of all proportion to the issues in Ukraine. But it shows how difficult a day certainly President Putin is having.
Okay.